Good morning. My name is Isabella Mason. I am a student at Grand Canyon University. This is my video submission for the Disposition of Teaching assignment in course UNV 108. So, first of all, as an introduction into the Dispositions of Teaching, if you're watching this and you don't know what that is, it's basically traits and qualities that you can have that will contribute to you being a good teacher. So, for example, let's say if you're going to be a zookeeper, obviously you need to be good with animals. That's a disposition. You need to be caring, kind, stuff like that. It's just the traits that add up and account for you being good at something or being a professional or things like that. I would say that my biggest dispositions that I already have would probably be compassion. Empathy is a big one. Also, respect for diversity, and then equality. I feel like definitely are some big ones for me. I feel like they kind of all tie in together. Obviously, compassion is, the care and respect that you give to others, the way that you make other people feel, um, the amount of, you know, just the caring feeling that you put out into the world. I feel like, the acknowledgement of other people's situations and the willingness to try to positively impact situations that might not be positive themselves. Things like that I feel like would count as compassion. Empathy, obviously, putting yourself in someone else's shoes and acknowledging, I have things one way, they have one things another way. You know, I want to help them to best, live, efficiently, effectively, whatever. Obviously, you know, if I see a student and I see that they're struggling with getting homework done or completing projects in a timely manner, things like that, instead of reprimanding the student and, you know, disciplining them, to reach out to their family and be like, hey, is so and so doing okay at home? Um, is everything, has there been any major changes? Um, are we having a hard time sleeping, things like that, things that can contribute to them not being able to be as involved in class as they want or need to be, things like that. Um, I feel like respect for diversity is also has a place in compassion as well, because like I said, it's the positivity that you put out, it's the way that you make others feel, things like that. And diversity isn't just about what we put it as face value. I feel like we also often see diversity as skin color, people's races, people's sexuality, stuff like that. Um, but diversity also counts for what you cannot see. Um, Children with, mental handicaps, disabilities, children who have lighter, learning disabilities like ADHD and, autism, things like that, where you can't see it, but it is there and it does affect the way that they learn. It's not by textbook. They're not going to learn looking at a computer. They're not going to learn, by sitting and just watching you or just listening to you. There are different teaching styles and there are different learning styles. One child might be good at watching a video and then they might know exactly what to do. Another child might listen to a podcast and the podcast tells them, this is what you need to do this, but that's not effective. That's not going to help every single student. Some kids need to, do more hands-on things. They need to do it themselves in order to be able to retain the information. And some kids don't learn from any of those. It's up to you as a teacher to figure out what works for your students. Obviously, parents' contribution can help, and students' contribution as well. I feel like we often don't look to the student for guidance, but who better to answer a question about you than you? Even our younger students like kindergarten, pre-K, stuff like that, if you ask a little kid how they're feeling, they will be able to tell you, believe it or not. I feel like that contributes a lot to how we, you know, teach, how we plan for our curriculum, and then, obviously how our students learn. And I feel like when we incorporate, one child's ability or best way of learning into our class and the way that we teach, it can also help students who don't even know that they have learning disabilities or who don't have any at all. A kid who might be, perfect textbook just like everybody else might learn better in a way that a child with a disability might learn. To give the child who is, by the book, a fidget toy or something to do with their hands while they're learning, something that helps a child who is, different, and then, you know, they will succeed as well, maybe. Maybe. It's just about trial and error. That's all about what teaching is. Obviously, even with all of the positive dispositions that you can have, there is a lot of trial and error you're going to have to go through to get there. You could graduate with your master's, PhD, whatever. You're not going to know it all, unfortunately. Um, I feel like some dispositions I could work on is creativity, just not in the way you might think. Creativity for me, being a teacher, it's not about, how much art we're doing or, are we playing with Play Doh while we're doing our lessons, stuff like that. I feel like creativity for me is how much I'm engaging my students in the way that I teach. So when I'm, planning curriculum and stuff like that, I want my kids to leave my classroom thinking. I want them to leave my classroom like, I didn't think about things like that before. I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna talk to my mom, stuff like that. I want to be the reason that when your kids are in the car and you're asking them, and you're like, "Hey, how was school? What'd you guys do today?" They're like, "Hmm." I want to be the reason that you talk to them, stuff like that. I want to give kids a reason to think, a reason to talk, a reason to connect with their peers and be like, "Hey, did you guys see what Mrs. Mason told us today? You know, how do you guys feel about that? Did you think about that? Because I didn't know that." Stuff like that, to engage my students and then to engage people via my students. Ways like that. I feel like that's what makes a good teacher, is how much your up here is clinking when you leave their classroom. Um, but I feel like for me, the only hard thing is that even when my gears are ticking, you can't control everybody else's gears. So it's up to me as an educator to come up with ways to involve all of my students, things like that. And I feel like that's what I need to work on the most. I've done enough self reflection to know what helps me and what's going to help me teach, but I need to reflect and think, okay, I know what's going to help me teach and what's going to be effective for my teaching, what's going to be effective for my students' learning, stuff like that. And then I feel like with professionals, it's just important for them to also maintain, not from bias. Obviously, I know I'm not perfect, and obviously, I don't know the exact right way to do anything, which nobody does. Don't let them fool you. But I feel like compassion is very important. Being an educator, obviously, and being a teacher, but also just as a person. And I feel like everybody should be compassionate, but that's a conversation we'll get for in another day. But um, that, and then also just general respect. I feel like sometimes as teachers, we know things one way, and it's hard for us to respect when things aren't the way that we were taught. But it's fact. Not everything that we think we know is right. I could be 30 years into my teaching career, and a 12-year-old could tell me something, and it would be a better way of thinking than I'd been thinking for my entire life. You just have to keep an open mind. You have to keep open respect for all of those around you, because you never know where, intellect's going to come from. Obviously, honesty, maintaining honesty with yourself and honesty with your students. Um, Making sure that the environment is stable and structured, that they don't feel like you're telling them one thing and then, doing another and stuff like that. And then also, obviously, like I said before, adaptability, acknowledging children from all different lifestyles. Things might not be easy for one student like they are for another, and vice versa. And it's the same with your colleagues and stuff as well. Just because you have it one way does not mean that they have it the same. And you do, unfortunately, need to just adapt. That's my biggest advice to anybody is just whatever situation you're in, whether it's beneficial to you or not, just be the bigger person and take it as it is, and then become in a flow with it. Um, just take things day by day. But that is my submission for the dispositions of teaching. I hope you guys all enjoyed. Um, This video will be public on YouTube, so questions, comments, whatever, you can refer to me. I promise I'll answer.